Hi folks, my name is Karthik, and I'm Iteration 1 on Twitter. Yesterday somebody asked me why is Iteration 1? And so this account is like 10 years old, and when I made this account, I was very much into Scrum. And so because of Scrum, I was like, oh yeah, first iteration, this is a good idea. So I took that account. In retrospect, I should have used Karthik. Welcome to the talk. This talk is about 10 years of DevOps. And then when I sent the talk in, a couple of people pinged me and they said, hey, it's more than 10 years. We've been doing this since 2005. So it's at least 10 years, probably more. I did this thing where my Spanish is horrible, but I used Google Translate for some of the words. I think it translates correctly to give the right message, but apologies if something doesn't make sense or just see me after. But basically today, I was just going to give a quick history of DevOps in the last 10 years, kind of where we started, where we came, what we have learned in the last 10 years, and kind of do a DevOps 2.0, what are important things today, and some of the current trends that we are seeing. But most importantly, I want to leave with some actionable things. So I'll give you 5 ideas that I use every day from a DevOps perspective, so you can use that as well. So my name is Karthik. I work at Oracle, Oracle Cloud. Whenever I tell people I work at Oracle, they ask me DBA questions. But I know some 1, 2 normal form, but mostly I know a lot of cloud stuff. So I actually work on cloudnative.oracle.com. It's Cloud Native Labs. That's our team thing. So we have a bunch of content for Kubernetes, containers, etc. And I came from product development. So I was on the feature team for the managed Kubernetes service. So if anybody has questions about Kubernetes and open space or anything, come see me. I can be happy to answer. I've been in industry for a long time now. It didn't seem like that long, but long time. Both big company, small company, and then I didn't like how things were working in a big company, so I went to a small company, and now I'm back in one of the biggest companies in the universe. So it's kind of nice. I run DevOps Days Austin, so I'm actually wearing the DevOps Days shirt. Thank you for all of the organizers for all of the hard work that they've done in DevOps Days Montevideo. I think it's amazing. And I also have, I chair the all-day DevOps track, which is there's a conference online called All Day DevOps. It happens in November, I think it's November 6th this year. So you can just watch everything on YouTube online. It's free. And there's, I think, 125, 150 speakers about all different topics in this space. So check it out. And I'm also an author on LinkedIn Learning for Kubernetes and a bunch of cloud native stuff. So anyways, I will be talking a lot, but I just wanted to get audience of who you are, what you do. So raise your hand if you're a developer. Okay, some 30% maybe. How about operations or SRE? Okay. So another third. What about QA test? I see Guillermo in the back. A few QA folks. How about management? Okay, some folks in management. This is typical spread that we see at DevOps Days. Most of my talk, I'm actually a longtime developer. Do a bunch of DevOps stuff in there as well. So this is good. The content at least is right. So let's take a look at some history, right? So history, this conference, you may have already read about it, but in 2008, a long time ago, his Agile conference, this guy, Andrew Clay Schaefer, he pitched Birds of Feather. It's kind of like open space, where he said, hey, I want to talk about this idea of Agile infrastructure, because infrastructure is very stagnant, so I want to change some ideas, and I want to talk about some ideas. So this other guy, Patrick Dubois, said, hey, this sounds like a good idea. I'm going to go to this thing. So he went. At the time, Bird of Feather, Andrew wasn't there. And then he was like, well, where is this Andrew guy? Anyways, later on in that conference, they met up and they talked about some ideas. And then in 2009 at Velocity Conference, John Allspaw and Paul Hammond, they gave this talk of 10 deploys a day at Flickr. And so they talked about how development operations collaborate to do many deploys in a day. And the crowd in this conference, they were like, wow, we do one deploy a year, maybe one deploy every 3 months. Like, why are these people doing 10 deploys a day? So everybody was going crazy. Patrick, meantime, he didn't go to Velocity, but he was kind of lamenting. He was like, I wanted to hear this idea in person, and I wasn't there. I missed out on stuff. And so somebody told him, hey, you can do like your own conference in your own city in Belgium. Like, why don't you have like Velocity in Europe? And he said, oh, this is a good idea. So then he ended up creating the first DevOps Days in Ghent in 2009. And so he called it DevOps because he was like, well, I want to talk to developers, I want to talk to operations. Okay, I put two together. So that's why I called it DevOps, and he added days at the end. But long story short, what is it? What is this whole DevOps thing that people keep talking about? Donovan yesterday gave a really good definition on how DevOps relates to product. This is a little bit more generic, and I like this definition, but I think both of them are relevant. But I like this one because it's from some friends of mine. It's also like the most popular definition on Google. But it's basically a practice of operations and developers participating in the same, together in the same service lifecycle, whether it's like design phase, test phase, development phase, like all the way until production support. So through the entire lifecycle of your project or product, it's two sets of different folks working together to solve the same problem. This is a little bit more generic because so this is from the Agile admin, and the other Agile admin folks are in Austin, so I kind of know them pretty well. And so all of us came from an IT background and not from a product background. So sometimes in IT you have project, and sometimes in engineering you have products, but you might not always have a product. You might have like project every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever. So that's kind of like where some of these ideas come from. And then John Willis and Damon came up with the Pillars of DevOps. So they had like 5 pillars. In short, we call this COMS or CLAMS: culture, automation, measurement sharing, and lean. And so like at least when it started, that was the intent. There was like a definition, there was some principles for DevOps, and that was like ideal world, back in 2009, 2010. But what has it become today? Because we don't care about, we some care about history a little bit, but we care about how it applies today. And today, for whatever reason, DevOps has become more about, from comms, it's become A&M. So the automation portion of DevOps is very popular, as is the measurement portion of DevOps. And some of the other things, culture, lean sharing, those things are, everybody says and agrees that they're really important. But, if you read blogs, you think, hey, DevOps is, pipelines, or DevOps is automation. And so one thing I've started to kind of think about is okay, well, what did this happen? Did we fail? Did we succeed? Why did this change all of a sudden? Or why did this change over time? And there's the reasons I kind of come up with for this is, so we are all engineers. Regardless of our specific job title, we're still building stuff, testing stuff, breaking stuff. And so for us, automation, measurement, those things we understand really well. We're like, okay, this process is really complicated. Want to change this and make it more efficient. I know how to do that. And so I added this Dilbert thing in here because I'm a fan of Dilbert. But it's to us, when we are faced with many big problems, we always choose the most interesting or the easiest problem first. Automation and measurement is one of those things. Also with respect to organizational culture, so many of us we work on large teams and we want to do things that we can control. When you're faced with an organizational change, that's very large, and you might need management or something to actually do some of these things. So it's actually very, very hard to change some of that. I'll transition to this side. And also, just in general, change is very hard, right? So we are all human beings. We like routine, doing same thing. Sometimes it's nice to like change things a little bit, but in general, it's like a hard thing to do. And so I put this in here as like, oh, don't be afraid of change. And then somebody says something totally crazy, and you're like, oh no, okay, this is not what I meant. And so sometimes you roll back the idea. Shlomo made a point yesterday where he says, you see it through. So you start and you take the steps. Sometimes it might feel like you're going backwards, but keep at it. But that's one of the reasons why it's like, okay, it's it might not be what exactly we want it to be in general. So our definition changed, and we kind of now in industry we focus on two specific subsets of pillars. But one thing we have forgotten, or one thing that newer folks coming into the DevOps ideology, methodology, they forget that this is actually like people problem. So it's actually not, you working with a computer, it's actually you collaborating with somebody else. And so this is kind of where we come to the DevOps in a box. And so you go to a vendor and they're like, hey, we have DevOps solution. Everything will work. Pay us a lot of money and we'll give you your DevOps solution. So this is not what the spirit of the whole idea and stuff is about. So kind of, I feel like I'm being very negative, like, oh, this is not working, etc. But kind of where do we go from here, right? And what steps do we take? So if we roll all of this back, our business, in the last 10 years, we've done a lot of things in technology. But on the business side, too, many things have changed. And, business does not really stop, regardless of what we are doing from a technology standpoint. We are all working, most of us work in companies that either have products or have a business strategy. And we're doing all of our technical work to support the business. And the business side always wants to go faster. They, like you, if you go to your CEO and say, hey, we cannot ship this month or next month, we have to wait 2 months, he'll look at you and think you're a little crazy. Maybe think about getting somebody new for the stuff you're doing. But in the State of DevOps report in 2019, so for some of the management folks in the room, if you've not heard of the DevOps State of DevOps report from Dora, take a look at it. It gives you some of the different things that are happening in the DevOps space. So a really good thing to know about. And also just from an evolution of, kind of where we've been, where we're going from a technical standpoint, in the 80s, we always talked about waterfall development process. We loved our monoliths, like large applications, physical servers, and everybody was very proud of their own like data centers in their companies. When I started in industry, we were slowly starting to make the shift from waterfall into agile. In fact, in my first job, we started doing Scrum, and I was like, I don't understand why we're doing Scrum. What was wrong with the old way? But that's like a long time ago. Applications architectures went from monolithic to n-tier. When I did my senior thesis for my master's degree, I actually had like an n-tier application architecture thing that I wrote about. So it's like near and dear to me. Physical servers, VMware was big in that time, so they became virtual, and then we went to hosted. And today, we've gone from a development standpoint, we go from Agile to DevOps. We're always talking about microservices, how to deploy things in small isolated units. From a packaging standpoint, containers are very popular to like package your applications, put it into containers and deploy them. And most of the time, companies are making, a lot of people are already inside of cloud, but a lot of enterprise companies are also starting to make that shift into the cloud market. So one of the things that all of the technical side and the business side, they're both changing, and so there needs to be a lot of alignment between the two, because if there's no alignment between your tech and between your business, then your company is going to fail. So you really need to make sure that both the organizations are working towards the same goal. One thing that DevOps helps with is alignment inside of your technical team. So your technical team is not just developers. It's also developers, it's operations, it's testing. It's like everybody that actually works from a technical standpoint. And it's really ends up being more of a people problem. And the whole idea of the DevOps principles is to be able to keep your team working more effectively and walking towards your business goal. Behind the scenes, you use processes, automation, and all of the different things that, measurement sharing, etc. But you are working together to solve problems. And that's kind of like the general gist of DevOps that you should kind of leave with versus, thinking, DevOps means it's a pipeline, or DevOps means Jenkins, or something like that. So, let's take a look at, we've talked about some history stuff, so let's take a look at, where we are today and what are some of the current trends in the DevOps space. So, Andres yesterday talked about SRE and how SRE works at Twitter. And that was really good because it's actually, SRE is one very common question everybody asks is, I'm new and I want to be in operations, but should I be a DevOps person or should I be SRE? And it's like, what is the difference between the two? And it's a very common question that comes up today. And really, SRE is actually like a subset of DevOps. And the concerns of an SRE engineer are, and SREs actually might also come from either development or operations side. It doesn't really matter. But the responsibility is making sure that the availability, latency, performance, efficiency of your applications from a monitoring, emergency response, and capacity planning of your services. So from that standpoint, SREs are working to make sure that the health of all of your things continues to be great in whatever setting. And so it's similar to DevOps, and it's like one of the subsets of DevOps. So they still have the principles of clams or comms from an SRE standpoint, but it's a little bit more focused. Google actually wrote this book, and if you just Google SRE book, you can actually find this online. It's a free book by Google. Really good read and really good idea for kind of how to monitor and manage your applications in like a modern era. So pretty good thing to read. Also today everybody's talking about cloud native. So it's like cloud native. Like, this is, we should be doing cloud native if we're not already doing cloud native, but what does it really mean? So cloud native is, it's championed by the CNCF, and a lot of the projects live inside of the CNCF, but it's basically a new paradigm. In the last 5 years, we've started to use containers a lot, and even in containers, things have changed quite a bit. So before we were talking about just a single container, easy to package all your applications running on one server, and you can put many containers on one server. Then we realized, actually, you can use containers for your whole infrastructure. So now I can deploy my whole production in containers across many servers. And then we were like, well, how do these things talk together? So we went into this orchestration block, and that's kind of where Kubernetes was born. This definition kind of says, it's the new computing paradigm that is for modern distributed systems. So when you're deploying to cloud, you might consider using something like Kubernetes. And it's capable of scaling from like tens to like thousands of servers if you want to. And one of the nice things about Kubernetes in general is its idea of self-healing. So if something breaks, it can try and fix itself. So we talk about the self-healing multi-tenant nodes. But a lot of this is kind of based. It started with the idea of using Kubernetes because that was donated to the CNCF from Google. And it's very rich. Like there's a lot of very different projects in that. In fact, I think this next slide, this is a capture of all of the different projects. Don't worry, nobody can read the slide. They actually made a little roadmap or trail map of the important projects in here. But one thing that's, when I say a rich ecosystem, it's good, but also it's a little scary because I'm like, I don't really understand, what this project is. And I spend a lot of time working on cloud native stuff at Oracle. We kind of have to look at, what different projects do, how they're compatible, etc. So I spend, once a week, I'll end up looking at what's the new revisions in this project, did something new come out, and so it's a pretty hairy landscape. This is a picture of my kid. He makes funny faces, so I decided to put it on here. But I scream the same way sometimes when I'm like, how is this thing different from this other? I don't know. Also, okay, I was like, why did the things change? But that's fine. There's the rise of serverless, and so serverless kind of came about when a lot of folks were talking about containers and they were talking about Kubernetes, and it started becoming more and more complicated. Like I showed in the last picture, like a lot of different things. So the serverless idea is very different from the idea of Kubernetes and like managing all of your containers, etc. It's a new execution model, and basically your cloud provider manages your resources. So you are kind of responsible just for your code. So you write your code, and it's. I started playing. So Oracle just released our new serverless platform called Oracle Functions. Amazon has Lambda, etc. So I've been kind of playing in this landscape. And to me, it's the mind shift for a developer is very different, because all I'm doing is trying to solve, one specific problem in a function in a serverless way. And I don't really care where it goes, like what node it goes to, etc. The cloud provider handles that for me. So that's kind of like a different paradigm shift, and you're kind of just working on your specific code. One thing that's also changed is that because today, when I started in industry, in our company, we had maybe like 20, 30 production servers. So in our 30 production servers, for example, like we could remember all the names of the servers. They were all like, web server 1, web server 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. And so you keep that in your head, and you're like, oh, there's an application problem. I think it's because web server 4 has memory issues, so you can kind of trace through. Today, that's not the case. We live in a cloud world. Donovan talked about Black Friday yesterday. Sometimes you have many people that want to, access your applications on a specific day, so you need to make sure you can scale up, scale down, etc. And so this, for us, from a technical point of view, it changes for how to monitor your applications, and that's kind of where observability plays a role. It's understanding what the hell is going on in a distributed system, because sometimes, most of the time your application works, sometimes it fails, and you're like, I don't actually understand where this is failing behind the scenes. So it's trying to kind of debug your application from an end user perspective. So I put a definition of that up here. It's a measure of how internal states of a system can be inferred from knowledge looking at it from an outside perspective. And it's determining system behavior from like system outputs. So when you're trying to trace through in a large complex distributed system, either in Kubernetes or in serverless, or even between the two things, and you're like, well, every now and then this one request seems to take really long, and let me figure out what's actually going on behind the scenes. Like that's kind of where you're using some of the observability techniques. Also, one of the other changes is we, from development, operations, DevOps, this has been here for about 10 years, and or a little bit over 10 years. But there's also other groups that we work with. For example, there's there's testing. There's all the some companies have like large test teams. Some companies have security teams. And yesterday I liked the talk that the folks had about DevSecOps. And a lot of these are when DevOps initially started, operations really liked it because it was a 10:1 ratio. So for every 10 developers, you have one operations person. Security is kind of the same way, where for every 100 developers, you have 10 operations people and one security person. So it's trying to like bring in a lot of the groups into this DevOps mindset. And a lot of this is the whole idea of shifting your problem left. So instead of being the last person in the chain who gets all the work dumped on them, and you have to go, either test in one day or find security vulnerabilities, etc. in one day. Try to do that a lot earlier. So that's the whole idea of shifting to the left-hand side. DevDB Ops is also pretty new. It's one thing, I think it's still very nascent today, But I think over the next 5 years, we'll start seeing a lot of that where DBAs are kind of in the same space where they today are like operations many years ago, where they're responsible for the database, making sure the database is online, 100% or whatever SLA that they have, which is the same analogy as operations like 10 years ago, where they were responsible for the machine. But really, that mindset for operations changed when they were like, well, I'm not just responsible for this specific machine, but also just for making sure that our website, our business runs. And I think databases will kind of go the same way. We'll probably start to see a transition more for that when we start pushing like data into the cloud, because I think that's one of the things that sparked the whole DevOps revolution was the companies actually moving to cloud in an agile manner. And now that we kind of have like DBs also, like people saying, hey, it's okay to actually store your data in the cloud, we'll start seeing a little bit more traction about that. One thing that is important for all of us is all of these are new groups kind of trying to come in to understand DevOps and play in our space, and we should just be inclusive of them and say, hey, yeah, come on, join the party, because it's in the end it's all about community. Also, from a vendor standpoint, one thing we see is like vendors also embracing open source. And there's really two reasons for this. First reason is when people are in school today, in college, in grad school, everybody's kind of working on open source stuff, projects adding features, etc. And so they're the new generation is very interested in open source and wants to learn more about it. They don't necessarily want to learn like closed source stuff. And also, that's kind of where the market is going. So we see, I showed you the CNCF picture a little while earlier. A lot of things are changing in that, a lot of projects, etc. And there's a lot of excitement. So I went to KubeCon in San Diego, and I think it was like 10,000 people, or not San Diego, in Barcelona. San Diego, they're expecting 12 or 13,000 people. So lots of people, working on open source stuff. An example of this is our Oracle Cloud Native environment. So some of the Oracle Linux folks are here, but this is actually having all of the cloud native tooling that you have inside of your, inside of your OS. So you don't have to spend a lot of time installing and doing all the things to get it to work. It's kind of there by default, and it's some of the stuff that we kind of manage. But also, this is the Oracle example, but there's also a bunch of like different examples of other vendors doing the same thing. So the idea is that I think vendors understand a lot more now that, hey, everybody's kind of working in open source, and that's where I think the mind shift will go. So if today you work at IBM and you're working on Kubernetes and IBM, and tomorrow you're like, hey, I want to go work at Microsoft, you can go work on Kubernetes at Microsoft, and all of the stuff that you've done with Kubernetes at IBM is the same as Kubernetes at Microsoft, is the same as Kubernetes and Oracle, etc. So it's the same open source stuff that we're working on, regardless of whether it's different companies. So I'm going to end with some 5 practices that have really helped me, and so I wanted to talk through those real quick. First off is this is kind of, for me, one thing in my career is I've always been very curious about problems, and so a bug is a bug is a bug. So regardless of who made it, what happened, our job as engineers is to try and figure out what's going on. Sometimes it's a code problem, sometimes it's an operational problem, sometimes it's monitoring, whatever. But we are trying to figure out what it is, and so try and figure out, learn what the other side is doing. So one example of this is when I was trying to figure out had a database problem. It's always a database problem. But I was trying to figure out why my application was slow with the request response after I ran some tests. Ended up being because I was not reusing connections, etc. And somehow I ran into this problem like many times in my career. But maybe I'm a bad engineer. But anyways, you had to go figure out whether it was something to do with the machine, with a box, or something to do with monitoring, etc. And so you have to kind of learn different skills to be able to do that. And one of the best ways to do that is understand, if you're coming from development, understand what the operations is doing. If you're coming from operations, go ask your developers how, how they write their code, why they instrument their code a specific way. Don't just say, oh, these other people don't know what they're doing, etc. Go and kind of learn what they're doing, because in the end, it's all about collaboration. Also, most importantly, understand your business, because those people, they're the ones who pay you whatever they pay you. So if you don't know what your business is, it's probably, you should go learn it. It's just, this is good advice. Architecture is also one really interesting thing. So in our technical industry, we argue very much about specific things. Like in development, we argue like how you should put everything in source control, whether you single repo or multi-repo, etc. Like many kind of problems. This thing also gets really, really frustrating when you're trying to work with somebody who does not have the same mindset as you. So between development and operations, it's sometimes like the separations of concerns are very different. So one thing that really helps is everybody understanding what the architecture of the system that you're deploying is. And it helps you take like a maybe frustrating conversation and bring it back to say, hey, this is the architecture that we are trying to deploy. This is the architecture that we, as a technical team, agreed to. So let's figure out how we can actually get to that architecture and figure out our problems. It's a good way to for everybody to come back to the same page instead of arguing about something very small. Like it helps you take you back to the big picture. And I think this is my last one. So it's an idea of always be learning. So 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when I first came to industry, not many people were using Git. Today, everybody uses Git. Same thing with when DevOps started 10 years ago, everybody was talking about config management. So they were talking about, if I do DevOps, should I be doing Chef, Puppet, like which one? Today, most people are doing cloud native things, working with Kubernetes, that's kind of hot. And so if you were, if I was stuck like 15 years ago and I said, hey, I will only use Perforce my whole career, I would probably be not in a technical field now. So always be learning. Things change every 5 years for us in our industry. So keep tabs with what's new going on, what is new that might be going on. And finally, be empathetic. So empathy is something we, I think over time, we start to appreciate this more and more. Because when we're young, we want to solve the problem. We want to solve first person to solve the problem. And over time, you're like, well, problems will always be there. We will always have bugs because we are always writing software. And I think there's a 10% chance that any code you write, there's going to be a bug in there. So the probability is never zero, which is kind of sad. But the tech will always be there, and we'll always be learning things, writing new things. But in the end, we are working together as a team, and as like everybody, Montevideo actually reminds me very much of Austin, where the tech community is very diverse, and it seems like many people know each other. So you might argue about, oh, this Kubernetes architecture for our company is bad, blah blah blah. And you might get into a heated argument with somebody else, and you'll be like, whatever, that guy doesn't know what he's doing, or that lady doesn't know what she's doing. But today, you might argue. Tomorrow, you might have to work together at a different company. So, be empathetic. People, technology is always there, but people might be there today, might not be there tomorrow. But we're all kind of in this together. So with that, that's the end of my talk. I'll be around all day, happy to answer questions on this or really anything that anybody has. Thank you so much. Gracias.